I mostly read public domain books here on Glenn Reads Books to You, and they were written a long time ago, so they're usually racist, or sexist, or bigoted, but in there somewhere is a story, and that's why those stories are famous. Other times, I read works from independent authors, and they're delightfully not racist, but they might have adult language or adult situations, like, making sex. So that's your warning, but I'm sure you're grown up enough to handle it. Don't write to me complaining. What kind of nightmare is that, being pummeled by millions of babies' fists in the face? It's the stupidest dream I've ever... Oh, son of a... All right. Take a seat, you little idiot. I was just reflecting on the fact that I had a horrible nightmare last night, which I'm not going to tell you about. It's none of your business. But it did inspire me that if I'm going to record an episode, that I will do it about horror stories, specifically by Drac Von Stoller. Welcome to the Glenn Reads Books to You mansion. It's a fun little bit where I pretend to live in a mansion and not just recording in my basement. This is where I read the hottest public domain books and short stories. This week, we're going to read 2 short stories from the book 31 Horrifying Tales from the Dead by Drac Von Stoller. Scared to Death, Burp, and Spells of Death. About the author, Drac Von Stoller's imagination and fascination for the horror genre began when he was a little boy watching his favorite actors, such as Vincent Price, Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, and Bela Lugosi, on his little black and white television, alone in his bedroom with the lights out. I also had a little black and white television. Back in the 70s, those were the cheapest ones to get from Target. My parents were going to pay for like an actual color one in my room. Drac Von Stoller would watch these horror stories for hours under the covers. Drac Von Stoller would have nightmares, but he didn't care because he loved watching these types of movies. His fascination with movies went beyond the TV screen to building model kits of his favorite characters like Dracula, the Wolfman, Frankenstein, and the Munster car from his favorite television series. I used to make those too when I was a kid. Some of them even glowed in the dark. When Drac Von Stoller became an adult, he decided one day that he would write a short story in the horror genre and let some of his friends read it and see what they thought. He wasn't sure if they'd like what he wrote, and if they weren't impressed, then his dream would be shattered. But that would not be the case. Drac's first story he wrote was considered flash fiction called Death in the Wilderness. Just something to make them want more, and that's exactly what they wanted. Drac felt he had succeeded, and now the rest is history. To date, Drac Von Stoller has written 228 stories, self-published his 7-volume collection, 31 Horrifying Stories from the Dead. His work has been downloaded over 2.6 million times through Google Books, Smashwords, Apple, Barnes & Noble's, Amazon, and many others in more than 147 countries. He's sold 4,140 audiobooks with the help of very talented narrators through the ACX as well. But Drac's real dream was to see his creations come to life. In collaboration with David Havener, 9 of Drac Von Stoller's short stories, Bloody Mary, Babysitter, The Man Upstairs, The Haunted Mirror, The Doll, The Clown Statue, The Cemetery of the Living Dead, Dracula, The Legend Lives, The Vanishing Hitchhiker, and No More Mr. Nice Guy, have been released as short films on Amazon Prime Video and as an anthology on Tubi. And I'll put links to all that so that you can go see him if you want to see him or go get some of his books. As a little side story, fun facts, he's a pharmacist. He's 10 years older than me, and he has a Twitter account with just 1 post on it. But there was a time when I was worried that he might have died during the pandemic because he had nothing out there. Like, nothing had changed since 2019. So I got all nervous and actually emailed him saying, hey, I'd like to read your stories. Are you still alive? And he actually wrote back to me, giving me permission to read his stories, and just kind of told me everything he's been doing. Oh, well... That's the grandfather clock telling me to shut up, so why don't we go down to the library and read these stories. There you go. Why don't you take a seat? Why don't we just get into it? Scared to Death by Drac Von Stoller. Henry was a very handsome man that the ladies always had their eyes on. Henry wasn't a wealthy man, and he wasn't born into wealth, but Henry always dreamed he'd marry into wealth someday and have all the precious things he dreamed about. When Henry was around his friends, he'd talk like he had money, because most of his friends had an abundance of money, but not having any wealth like his friends made Henry jealous. Ow! Oh, Henry's relationships were not much to speak of. Many girls broke up with him after a few dates because he couldn't give lavish gifts. Well, Henry's luck and entire life was about to change because one of Henry's rich friends was invited to a party. Oh, his friend only knew one person that invited him, so he thought it would be a good idea to bring someone he knew to keep him company. Henry and his friend were having a good time at the party. Henry told Jack he was going to get some punch and he'd be back shortly. And just as Henry was scooping up some of that punch, a pretty blonde woman approached Henry and introduced herself to him because Henry's appearance took her breath away. She knew he was the one for her, and she wasn't going to let someone else take him away. Excuse me, sir, but could I please have some punch? Asked Monique. Sure, said Henry. Henry, burp, was blown away by her beauty. Oh, and was very happy they met. Monique said, I heard you're one of Jack's. He is a really great guy. Don't you think so? Yeah, he's been a close friend of mine for many years. Jack and I went to the same schools growing up, said Henry. I tell you what, would you like to come over to my place this Saturday? Around 6 o'clock, and I'll cook you a good meal, asked Monique. Oh, I'd be delighted to try your cooking. And I'm sure I won't be disappointed, said Henry. Oh, great. I'd like to introduce you to my godparents, Monique said. Well, after the party was over, Monique asked Henry if he would escort her to the car. And as Monique got into her car and Henry was turning away to meet up with Jack, Monique rolled down her window in the car and said, Henry, would you come over here for a moment? Then she said, Henry, it's quite all right if you'd like to kiss me goodbye. Well, so Henry kissed her and said, can I kiss you one more time? Monique said, sure. And that's fine with me. And after they kissed, Monique said, I'll see you Saturday. Don't be late. And Henry replied, don't you worry. I won't be late. Monique drove off into the sunset to her mansion. Henry got into the car with Jack, and Jack asked, how'd it go, Henry? Henry said, I believe I just found the woman I've been searching for all my life. Well, that's great. I hope it works out for you both, said Jack. Jack, she wants me to meet her godparents this Saturday. Well, Jack responded, Did you know her parents left her a vast fortune before their untimely death several years ago? They died when their private jet crashed over Mexico during a vacation. You think I've got a lot of money? Monique's wealth makes me look poor. Oh, if you marry Monique, you'll be set for life. Ooh, that's what I'm banking on, said Henry. Jack said, well, there's where I drop you off, and let me know how Saturday goes. Oh, I'll let you know. Don't worry, said Henry. Henry bought a nice suit to impress Monique for their Saturday date, and when Henry was finished with dinner at Monique's, Henry gave Monique a kiss goodbye, and Monique said, why don't you spend the night with me? This big house gets pretty lonely at night. I sure could use the company. Are you sure it's okay? You don't really know me that well, said Henry. Come on, Henry, I don't bite, said Monique. Henry accepted Monique's invitation, and they shared some wine together before turning in for the night. And as Monique and Henry lay in bed together, Monique asked Henry if he'd be interested in moving in with her. Oh, Henry replied, I'd love to move in with you. I'm tired of being a bachelor, and I really enjoy being with you. By the end of the week, Henry moved into Monique's mansion, and within a month, they were married. Oh, many years passed. There were good times and bad times. Henry liked his scotch and whiskey, and it showed. Oh, what he's got, rosacea? Henry loved Monique's money more than her. Monique was very depressed and unhappy with Henry's spending. Henry and Monique fought a lot, but that's probably what fueled Henry's drinking and Monique's depression. It was hard for Monique to get around because she'd fallen down the stairs and shattered the bones on her right leg. She had to limp around. Monique's beauty was deteriorating, and Henry felt it was time to get rid of Monique so that he could have her fortune to himself. Henry devised a plan to scare her to death. While Monique was sleeping, Henry hid a tape recorder in her room with a man and a woman's voice that would call out to Monique. He wanted to make her think it was her parents coming to visit from beyond the grave. Henry would put hallucinogenic drugs in her drink. That, combined with the voices on the tape recorder, really made Monique frightened on a daily basis. Monique would ask Henry if he had heard anything unusual, but he would say that she just had bad dreams. Henry would put on Monique's father's clothes at night. That's a little weird. When Monique would run out of the room to get help from Henry, he'd be down the hall calling out to Monique, saying, Monique, I've come for you. Come join me and your mother outside. We've dug you a fresh grave. Monique would run back into her room, lock the door, and jump back into bed. She pulled the covers over her head until the morning came. Henry's plan was working just as he thought it would. Just a few more terrifying scares, and Monique would be ready to take her own life. Henry planted a noose over the rafters above the top of the stairs, so when Monique would run out scared from her room, he hoped that she'd put the noose around her own neck. That's just like she'd run into it by accident and just start hanging. But no, he's trying to get her to go do it herself. Got it. Then Henry would come up behind her and give her a push. He'd help her lose her footing and dangle till the rope choked her last breath out of her body. Every night, Monique would come out screaming, running to the top of the stairs, and the noose would be swinging back and forth. Henry would be in Monique's father's clothes, trying to convince her to put the rope around her neck and join her mother and father in the cemetery behind the house over the hill. He'd say, we got a fresh grave that we dug just for you, so we can all be together forever. Henry decided to give Monique a stronger dose of hallucinogens to give her more confidence in putting the rope around her neck. The next night, as Monique was trying to get some sleep, the voices were ringing in her ears, and before she came running out of her room, Henry was outside the door and dressed in her father's clothes. The noose was swinging back and forth, waiting for Monique to take the plunge into death so that Henry could inherit her fortune. Henry was going to make sure that the noose was around her neck this time. And when Monique came out screaming from her room, she ran toward the top of the stairs where the noose was hanging. And as Henry came toward her, she grabbed the rope with one hand and put her head through the loop. Henry grabbed the rope and tightened it around her neck and said, Monique, we've been waiting for you. Now it's time to rest over the hill where your grave is waiting for you. Henry pushed her off the steps, and Monique's neck snapped as her lifeless body was swinging back and forth over the top of the stairs. Henry immediately called the police and told them she took her own life because she thought her parents were coming back from the grave. And when the police arrived, Henry told them Monique was very depressed from an accidental fall she had a couple years ago, and that she was on antidepressant drugs, which she often mixed with alcohol, making things even worse. Officer, she was such a kind person, loved life and her garden. Now I'm all alone in this big empty house, said Henry. The officer responded, there's no guarantees that the one you love will be with you for the rest of your life. So you must make the best out of what you have. Thank you, officer, for the kind words, said Henry, and the officer left Henry's house, and Henry went back to the study to drink his scotch and whiskey. Is he really just sitting around drinking two different types of hard alcohol? Like one bottle in each hand and just taking a swig of each one? That's crazy. He drank until he passed out on his desk with a bottle of scotch in one hand. As the months went by, Monique's fortune was dwindling away because Henry's expensive taste for wine and whiskey. One night, as Henry was sleeping in bed, he awoke in a cold sweat from a nightmare. Henry thought he heard Monique and her parents calling out to him to come out to the cemetery. Henry had just laughed it off as a nightmare. But this is no ordinary nightmare. Henry did not leave the house to socialize. Henry mainly stayed in the study to waste the day away in his alcohol. Henry staggered up the stairs to turn in for the night, and he fell flat on the bed, mumbling Monique's name, and passed out. Again, Henry awoke in a cold sweat, with Monique and her parents calling him out to the cemetery. Henry jumped out of bed and went to his bedroom window and peeked through the curtain. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. I must be sleepwalking. There are two women and a man calling out to me and pointing at the cemetery, Henry said to himself. It was pouring rain and the thunder and lightning, and Henry opened the bedroom window and told them to leave. But they kept pointing at the cemetery, saying, "Soon, you'll be with us." Henry ran downstairs to the study and got his rifle out of the gun case and loaded it. Oh, Henry swung open the door and pointed his rifle at the three figures in the storm. Tell them to leave or he'd shoot them, dead, in the tracks. But they didn't move. He just kept calling his name and pointing at the cemetery. Henry raised his rifle and opened fire on the three figures. The bullets did nothing but go right through them. Henry ran back inside the house, frightened out of his wits. Knowing that he had a shot at them, Henry locked the front door and carried the rifle upstairs to his bedroom. He looked out the window and the three figures were gone. Henry said to himself, I must be sleepwalking. Oh, that's what it was. Henry put the rifle down, climbed into bed, and went to sleep. Then, a few minutes later, there was a knock on the front door, which got louder and louder until Henry couldn't block out the noise. So he got out of bed. He grabbed the rifle and headed downstairs to see who was at the door. When Henry opened the door, there stood Monique, with a noose in her hand, and her two parents were reaching out to him, telling him to put the noose around his neck. Henry turned away in terror and started shooting at them with his rifle, but the bullets didn't stop them because they were already dead. Henry threw the rifle down, ran upstairs, and right as Henry reached the top of the stairs, the noose wrapped around poor, frightened Henry's neck. Then Monique gave Henry a push, and Henry's neck snapped just as Monique's had, and Henry's dead body was released from the noose, and Monique and her parents dragged Henry's dead body through the stormy weather, over the hill, and to the cemetery, where his grave was already dug. The next morning, the police came by to investigate the noises gunfire at Henry's mansion. When the police knocked on the door wasn't shut at all. So the police entered, calling out to Henry, but there was no response. One of the officers said, look at the top of the stairs. There's a noose dangling from the rafters. And as the officers reached the top of the stairs, there were 3 sets of muddy footprints. When one of the officers turned to look at the steps, he followed the muddy footprints down the stairs and out the front door, and the officer decided to call in for backup and treat this as a homicide. As the officers were searching the property, one of them found a shoe. And the other officer found a set of footprints leading to the top of the hill. And the grass was matted down as though someone had been dragging some behind them. And the other officers met the 2 officers at the top of the hill, and they all were shocked at what they saw. The chief of police said, I've been to this cemetery before and was present at Monique's burial and her parents' burial before that. And there's only 3 graves, not 4. Are you sure? Asked one of the officers. The chief said, I've been chief of police for over 30 years, and I have never made up anything. Well, no, sir, said the officer, and all the officers went down to look at the tombstone, and it read, May my greedy husband that killed me, R.I.P. One of the officers touched the writing on the tombstone and said, This is fresh blood. The officer's response was, there's no way Monique and her parents came back from the dead to kill Henry in the same way Monique died, or did they? After further investigation from the crime scene investigators, they decided to exhume the body from the 4th grave. Henry's body was in the grave with his eyes wide open in terror, as though he'd seen a ghost. The writing was determined to be the blood from Henry's own body, and the tombstone was dusted for prints. And it had several sets, but none other than Monique and her 2 parents. Many rumors spread throughout the town about what happened to Henry. Many teenagers would stop by to break into the mansion, see the noose hanging on the stair, and maybe even get a glimpse of the ghost of Monique and her parents. Each night, after the clock struck 12, the front door would open and the noose would be seen swinging back and forth at the top of the stairs. A shadowy man could be seen putting the noose over his head and being pushed by a dark figure. The man's body would then be dragged down the stairs and out the front door before vanishing into thin air. Other teenagers told stories about going to the top of the hill on a stormy night and seeing a freshly dug grave and the 3 shadowy figures dragging another shadowy figure down the hill to the grave. One of them would write something on the tombstone and the figures would disappear. Another story was told by a teenager that if you run back and forth over the 4 graves calling Monique's name 6 times, she'll rise up out of her grave and scratch your eyes out. What teenager told that story? The one that claimed to have done it, but still can look at you with unscratched eyes? Henry's death was later ruled unexplained and Monique's suicide. Since then, the mansion was boarded up and no trespassing signs were posted on the property. But that didn't stop the thrill seekers from getting a glimpse of the ghost. Well, it seems a good time as any for us to take a little break. why don't we go down to my basement? Which is fine, and it's not weird. It's totally normal. We go down to my basement where I've got a couch. I've got a TV that I still got to hook up a Google TV to. I got a little coffee table, little rug. It's getting really homey down there. But you can sit down there, and I will tell you about the latest upcoming books from Penguin Random House. Now, there you are. You finally made it. Thanks for coming down to my basement, which is totally normal and not weird or creepy at all. Go ahead. Sit in that folding chair underneath that naked light bulb as I stand here underneath this naked light bulb and let you know about the latest upcoming books from Penguin Random House while I play this guitar. I'm getting really good at it. This week's book, Sleep No More by Seanan McGuire. Not sure how to say this person's name. It's part of the October Day, that's D-A-Y with an E at the end, line of books. Category, urban fantasy, contemporary fantasy, paranormal fiction. It's a paperback and hardcover. Want to learn about it? Sure. The 17th novel, my God, of the Hugo-nominated New York Times bestselling October Day urban fantasy series. Again, I've talked about how you can game the New York Times bestselling author thing. It doesn't mean anything. October is very happy with her life as the second daughter of her pure-blood parents. Amandine and Simon Torquil, born to the changing handmaid to her beloved sister August. She spends her days working in her family's tower, serving as August's companion, and waiting for the day when her sister sets up a household of her own. Everything is right in October. October's fairy. Everything is perfect. I have no idea what's going on right now in this review. Everything is a lie. October has been pulled from her own reality and thrown into a twisted reinterpretation of fairy, where nothing is as should be, and everything has been distorted to support Titania's ideals. Who are these people? Don't understand. What does it mean? They're fairies? I don't understand. Bound by the Summer Queen's magic, who's that? And thrust into a world turned upside down, October has no way of knowing who she can trust, where she can turn, or even who she really is, as strangers who claim to know her begin to appear in the edges of Titania's paradise. It began to unravel. Toby will have to decide whether she can risk everything she knows based on only their stories of another world. But she'll have to survive this one, as Titania demonstrates why she needed to be banished in the first place. And this time, much more than Toby's own life is at stake. I literally have no idea what the hell I just read. That's Sleep No More by Seanan McGuire. It's a hardcover coming out September 5th, 2023. What? It's 2024. This is supposed to be a new book. Is the paperback the new book? Yeah, August 6, 2024. There you go. Why would they have that minimized and just kind of promote the hardcover? Because they want money. You can get it for $10.99 from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Bookshop.org, Hudson Booksellers, Powell's Target, and people might see this in the hollowed aisles of Walmart, and they'd be like, I don't know, I can't pronounce the person's name, and then they read the about no Sleep No More, and they'd be like, I have no idea what's going on, and they'll put it back up on that shelf with their grubby little hands, and then they'll move on to get themselves a giant bin of cheese balls. At Walmart, well, with that, why don't we go back upstairs and continue reading the next story in this book. Well, there you are. Take a seat, and we'll read the next story of this book, and then you can go home, because you're never invited to begin with, and then I can try to get like a book about dream interpretations and figure out what the hell I was dreaming about last night. Spells of Death by Drac Von Stoller. Billy Riddell liked to dabble in the occult, mainly because he was an outcast of his classmates at school. Billy stood about, 4 feet, 9 inches tall. That's a short man. With jet black hair. And a lisp when he would talk. Billy always dreamed about being class president one day, and even his ultimate dream was to be the president of the United States of America. But with that, it was stretching it a bit too far. Billy never stood up for himself. He would only just suppress his feelings, but we all know it's not healthy to bottle up your anger. As Billy was finishing out his senior year at Ragsdale High School, Billy's classmates invited him to a graduation party at Darren's house as a peace offering for all the bad deeds that were done to him during his school years. Billy had no idea this wasn't going to be a peace offering. It was just another trick that would cause Billy to want to get even with his classmates. His classmates didn't know that they were about to unleash an evil force that would be their last trick they would ever play on anyone again. Billy was so excited to go to the party and to have a good time that he put all his pranks behind him. Boy, was he in for a big surprise. Billy showed up right on time, dressed in his cap and gown. He had a cap and gown, and ready to party before graduation would begin in about 3 hours. He's just dressed up for the graduation. As Billy knocked on the door, he could hear the laughter and music that was coming from inside the house. But the laughter was about the prank that the classmates would be playing on Billy. The door opened, and Billy stepped inside, ready to party. Everyone was so nice to Billy and telling him how nice he looked and congratulating him on graduating in the top 10 of his class. Darren, the main prankster of the whole bunch, took Billy over to get some punch and to eat cake. The punch that Billy was about to drink was laced with enough sleeping pills to knock him out for a solid hour so the classmates could carry on the prank. Billy drank all of his punch and ate the cake and was enjoying the party when he started feeling real tired. I want to lie down on the couch. Darren asked Billy, "Are you okay?" Billy said, "I'm just feeling real tired. I would like to lie down on the couch for a few minutes." Billy lay down and his head hit the cushion on the couch. He went fast asleep. Darren nudged Billy, but Billy was fast asleep. Darren said, "Okay, turn the music off. We only have an hour to tar and feather Billy." Jesus. From what I know about tar and feathering, it's like your skin falls off and stuff because the tar has to be hot and it burns you alive. So you're going to tar and feather him while he's sleeping because graduation is an hour and a half away, so let's get started. Darren and some of the other classmates took Billy in the backyard and removed his clothing and brushed on tar all over his entire body, while other classmates tore pillows apart and shook the feathers all over Billy until his entire body was covered with feathers. Billy was in a deep sleep and had no idea what was going on. Darren and a couple classmates threw Billy in the back of Darren's truck and drove Billy's tarred and feathered body to the graduation at Ragsdale High School. As Billy's name was being called to receive the diploma, Billy stood up, and as he was approaching the stairs, the students were yelling Billy's name. Billy still had no clue he was being laughed at, so he walked up the steps to shake the principal's hand and get his diploma, and the principal said, "Billy, what's happened to you? Eh? Look at yourself. You're covered in feathers." Well, Billy felt his body and turned to Darren and his classmates and said, "You paid for this." Billy ran off the stage and phoned his mother and father to be picked up at school. Billy's parents were outraged, but Billy assured them it was okay and that he could handle this matter by himself. Even though Billy was, angered, he knew that since his great aunt was a direct descendant of the Salem witch that she had put a spell book lying around her attic or somewhere in the house. Billy said to himself, "I'm going to have the last laugh after all." And Billy got his parents together and headed to the great aunt's farm, where legend has had it that there's a book of spells hidden deep within the cave. It's in a cave. Billy just couldn't believe how naive he was to think that Darren would have felt guilty about all the pranks that he carried out against him. And as Billy was searching through the cave, looking feverishly for the book, he remembered that his great aunt left a sealed note in her dresser drawer with his name on it. So Billy decided to stop what he was doing, read the note his great aunt left him, and Billy ran to the farmhouse and went into his great aunt's bedroom, opened his antique dresser drawer, and there it was. The letter was where his aunt said it would be. Billy opened the envelope and started reading it aloud to himself. Dear Billy, I only have one thing of great value to leave you, and it is my book of spells that has been handed down generation after generation, and the only select few know where the book of spells is located in the cave. In order to find the book, you will have to follow the map, which I have included. Maybe this book will help you like it did me. P.S. This is our little secret, and no one's supposed to know about this. When you locate the book, burn the letter and keep the book in the cave, the same place where you found it. Love, Aunt Gracie. Billy couldn't wait to get his hands on the Spells of Death book. Finally, he'll be able to take revenge out on his classmates in a deadly way. And Billy raced back to the cave, retrieved the book of spells immediately, and put the book to use on his backstabbing classmates. Billy threw a pizza in the oven. Well, that was a little twist. And he was waiting for the pizza to cook. He started reading the table of contents for spells that he wanted to use on the classmates. Billy said, "Nah, this looks like a good spell for Karen. Ooh, I'll cast a spell on her that'll make her invisible to whoever she comes in contact with and will surely bring her to a breaking point by the time the spell wears off. Oh, and she'll be committed to a mental institution for the rest of her life." Billy said the spell aloud and repeated every word of the spell and closed the book and went to bed. Well, there were only 6 more classmates that were responsible for making a mockery all of those years Billy had to endure. And when Billy arrived at school, he saw Karen running up to her classmates, trying to strike up a conversation with anyone that would listen. But no one stopped to talk to her. They all just kept walking to their class without gazing upon her. Karen was frustrated, crying aloud, shouting at anyone that walked past her, but no one came to her aid. Karen rushed into her principal's office, screaming at the top of her lungs, but no one said a word. Well, Karen picked up the phone to call home, and her father answered, and all he heard was a busy signal, so he hung up on the phone. Karen picked up the phone and called her home again, and her father picked up the phone and said, "Who's there?" He says, "Is some kind of prank?" Before Karen could say a word, her father slammed the phone down on the receiver. Karen fell to her knees, crying her eyes out. And got up off her knees and ran out of school, screaming into the parking lot, and fainted. Well, the next morning the spell wore off, and a student found Karen lying in the middle of the school parking lot. The student tried to get a response from Karen, but there was none. The student called an ambulance, and the school principal called Karen's parents to get to school quickly, and they could ride in the ambulance with Karen to the hospital. The paramedics were checking Karen's vital signs as they headed to the hospital. As the ambulance approached the emergency department entrance, Karen's mother asked one of the paramedics her condition. The paramedic just said, "We'll see what the doctor has to say when he checks her over." About an hour later, the doctor came into the waiting area to give Karen's parents the news. The doctor told Karen's parents she is hallucinating and hearing voices, that she should be put in a mental institution to figure out what's going on. "I'm really sorry, but I wish I had some better news for you both." The next morning, Billy was in history class and noticed Karen wasn't at her desk. Billy asked one of the classmates, "Where's Karen?" The classmate replied, "You didn't hear? Karen was admitted to a mental institution this morning," Billy said. "Really? That's a shame, because she's such a nice girl," Billy said to himself. 1 down, 5 to go. Billy decided to pick out a spell that would top the spell that drove Karen insane. Billy said, "I believe this would be a really good one. How about a little game of Russian roulette?" Billy called Sonny, James, and Brenda onto the phone to join him this weekend for a bonfire at his aunt's farm. Well, everyone agreed, only because Billy put a spell on them. And Billy got a revolver out of his aunt's gun cabinet and loaded the gun with live bullets and put a silencer on the barrel so the shots couldn't be heard by any of the neighbors. Billy handed the revolver to Brenda and told her to spin the barrel of the gun and put the barrel to her temple and pull the trigger. Brenda did as Billy asked her to do, and Brenda dropped to the ground dead. Billy then asked Sonny to take the gun from Brenda's hand and point the gun at James' head and pull the trigger. Sonny pointed the gun at James' head and pulled the trigger, and James dropped dead to the ground. Billy told Sonny to point the gun at his own head and pull the trigger. Sonny pulled the trigger and dropped dead on the ground. Billy said, "That was easy. But I can't leave the dead bodies out in the open, so I guess the best thing to do now is throw their bodies in the bonfire and then bury their ashes." After Billy was through burying Sonny, James, and Brenda's ashes, he headed back to his aunt's house to pick out another spell for victim number 5, Johnny. Billy skimmed through the Spells of Death book and found a fitting spell for Johnny called Laugh to Death. Johnny was always a practical joker, but the next joke would put him 6 feet underground. The next evening was Ragsdale High School's talent show, and Johnny was about to hear the last joke that he wished he never heard. Billy came to the talent show to watch his spell in action as Johnny laughed himself to death. As the joke was being told, Johnny started laughing out of control. And even then, when the joke stopped, And the audience just stared at Johnny, and some of the people next to him tried to calm him down, but that didn't work. Finally, Johnny's heart gave out, and Johnny fell out of his chair onto the floor, and people were trying to revive him, but it was too late. Johnny was dead, and Billy quietly got out of his chair and walked out of Ragsdale High's talent show and headed back to his Aunt Sarah's farm to pick out the last spell for victim number 6, Darren. Billy had such a strong hatred towards Darren that he would make him suffer more than the other 5 classmates did. Billy called Darren to invite him over to his aunt's farm and that they would have a drink together. Darren agreed to come over. As the night wore on, Billy and Darren had a few drinks, and everything was going fine until Billy poured a potion into Darren's drink that would make Darren Billy's servant. Billy told Darren to go down the cellar and stand against the wall, and Darren did as Billy asked him to do. Billy had already had a wheelbarrow full of cement and bricks ready, waiting for his last victim. Oh, he's going to do a little Edgar Allan Poe thing. He's going to wall him in. Billy finished off his drink and headed down to the cellar, and Billy placed the bricks in front of Darren one by one until Darren was walled up with no way out. After a couple of hours, the spell that Billy put on Darren wore off, and the cement had already hardened. All Darren could do was call for help, but no one came. Billy just wiped his hands off and started whistling as he walked up the stairs to the cellar, turned for one last look at the wall, and turned off the light and shut the cellar door. Billy stretched his arms out and yawned and said, "I think this calls for a celebration." Billy got into his car and drove down to Joe's Tavern. Going to Joe's Tavern would be a big mistake for Billy, because anytime Billy had too much to drink, I thought he was a high school kid, he would have to brag about things that he'd done and the spells that he put on Brenda and James and Johnny and Darren and Sonny and Karen would do him in. As Billy chased down 4 shots of whiskey as a high school kid, his big mouth got the best of him, and the person that he was spilling the beans to was an off-duty police officer. Oh! The police officer went along with Billy's story and told Billy he'd like to offer him a ride home since he'd had a little too much to drink. As the officer was driving Billy to his aunt's farm, Billy fat-mouthed started pouring out the details of the spell he placed on his classmates and why he did it. As the officer helped Billy out of the car, Billy was pointing in the direction where Sonny, James, and Brenda lives were taken away from them by a game of Russian roulette that Billy Riddell's spells of death was responsible for. The officer asked Billy, "What are you pointing at?" Billy said, "Well, that's where Sonny, James, Brenda were playing Russian roulette, but I couldn't leave their bodies, so I tossed them into the fire. And then I burned their ashes somewhere over there." And he staggered around, barely keeping his footing. The officer luckily taped the whole conversation with a small cassette recorder, as he always leaves in his shirt pocket. And just in case something like this would happen, Billy said, "Why don't you come inside of my aunt's house, and I'll introduce you to a friend of mine. He's in the cellar." Billy and the officer headed down to the cellar as Billy was rambling on about his friend Darren. The officer replied, "Oh, yeah, you have a friend in the cellar named Darren?" "That's right," said the drunken Billy Riddell. As Billy and the officer went down the stairs to the cellar, Billy was calling out Darren's name. Oh, Billy staggered over to the wall, barely keeping his balance, and started knocking on the wall, telling Darren that a friend was here to see him, and it wasn't polite not to speak. Billy told the officer when he's bored, he comes down to the cellar with a glass of wine and talks to Darren, because it's lonely living on this farm all alone. Billy then asked the officer his name, and the officer said, "David's my name." Billy told the officer he needs to sit down because he had too much to drink. Billy started tapping on the wall and telling Darren to come out and meet his friend David. The officer said, "What is your friend David doing behind the wall?" Billy said, "He's been a very bad boy. I decided to teach him a lesson." "Well, what lesson is that?" said the officer. Billy replied, "Oh, he started this whole mess, so I laid one brick at a time until he was no more." After spilling the beans about Darren, Billy passed out on the floor from being so drunk. As Billy lay passed out on the floor in the cellar, the officer went back up the stairs to use Billy's telephone to call the crime scene investigator to canvass both crime scene areas where the murders took place. As the crime scene investigators searched the area where the fire was, bone fragments and a piece of jawbone was found. The officer, David, went back down to the cellar to try and talk to Billy, but all he did was mumble to himself and pass back out. Well, Officer David told the other officers, just before Billy passed out drunk, he tapped his hand on the wall and said, "Darren's right here." Right here. Officer David told the other officers to get a sledgehammer to see if Darren was really behind this wall. Sure enough, when the wall was broken down, there was Darren's decomposed body. Billy was right. "This must be Darren," said the police officer. And Officer David said, "I think we got enough evidence to put Billy away for life. Handcuff him, and let's take him down to the station for further questioning." But after 3 hours of deliberation by the grand jury, Billy was found guilty of 6 counts of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the deaths of Sonny, James, Karen, Darren, Brenda, and Johnny. Well, that's the end of that. Why don't we go over to the smoking room, and we can just talk about what the hell we just read. Well, there you go. Once you get yourself seated. As you can see there on the coffee table, I have a baboon's skull, where if you remove the top half of its skull, you'll see that his skull is filled with cigarettes. Also, my wife has birds here. Go ahead, take yourself a cigarette as we review what the hell we just read. The first story, it starts out where you think that Monique was like dead or a vampire or something spooky, but nope. She's just a normal person. She mentions meeting, come meet my godparents. And since Jack says that her parents died, you think that maybe there's something kind of complicated happening there with like the godparents and the dead parents. Who knows? You're waiting for something spooky to happen. But that never pans out. You just never even meet them. So there's a lot of misdirection because Henry sleeps with her and eventually marries her without any issues. Then He's the problem. He double fists scotch and whiskey, or sometimes wine and whiskey. It just ends up being a murderer. Eventually, he dies after murdering her, and then there's some after story with the grave and the ghosts recreating the final night, and teens running around, like kind of having their own little spooky things. It's fine. It's like a radio mystery theater episode, which I'm personally a big fan of. The next story is more straightforward with like a lot of foreshadowing at the very beginning where you're like, okay, something big's gonna happen. Billy wanted to be class president or president of the United States of America, but the classmates keep pranking him because he's so small and his hair's slicked back and real black hair, I don't know, and he's kind of lisp. They drug him and eventually tar and feather him, which I'm pretty sure involves burning your skin off and possibly dying. But he just kind of wakes up at the graduation because they cart him over to it, and he has no idea that anything's wrong until he gets up on the stage, gets his diploma, and the principal says, like, "What's wrong with you?" And he's like, oh, they tarred and feathered me. So he calls his parents and like, don't worry about it. I'll get him back. But he should be president of the United States of America because he's apparently indestructible like Deadpool and could live forever. But instead, he decides to focus all his superhero energy on ruining them one by one. So he decides to look for his aunt's book of spells. They kind of look around with the parents for a while. He can't find it. And then he remembers, conveniently, that she left a letter in her dresser drawer or something explaining where to find it. So using that, he gets it and uses various spells to ruin the kids who have taunted him. So he throws a pizza in the oven while he flips through the pages, picking the best way to ruin them. The first one is Karen, who he drove insane. So she went to an asylum for the rest of her life, and it's longer, kind of, than the rest of the revenge scenarios, except for the very last one. But that sets up a delicious standard for the rest of the story. So it's a little surprising when the rest of it kind of goes through the rest of them with Brenda, James, and Sonny. Without savoring the revenge. He just kind of makes them all shoot themselves in the head in the game of Russian roulette. But the gun is full of bullets, so there's no Russian roulette. They're just shooting themselves in the head. That's fine, whatever. But the spell book said this is a game of Russian roulette, but it's just a gun full of bullets. Then he makes a kid laugh to death. because it's a talent show that happens apparently after graduation, which, in my experience of graduation, it normally happens when the school year is done. Like, your school year is done. You don't go back to school anymore. Then you go to your graduation ceremony, where I was never tarred and feathered. But then there's a talent show, I guess. So, but okay, whatever. It's a progressive school. Johnny died by laughing to death on the stage. Then he finally kills, but not Billy. Damn it, what's his name? With the Cask of Monticello scenario, like the Edgar Allan Poe thing, where you wall him up and he's chained there and he's got to jingle his bells. There's no bells. There's no jingling. He's just walled up. Then, as a high school kid, he goes to a bar and drinks too much without any issue, where he brags about killing people to an off-duty cop, who also keeps a small tape recorder in his pocket because he's constantly recording conversations in case anyone admits they've committed a crime of any type. So he wants to get all the evidence. The cop doesn't care that he's underage or that the bar is serving underage kids. He just got like, okay, I got a murderer. Finally, my tape recorder is paying off. So he goes back to the kid's house and gets evidence and arrests Billy. What do we learn? I don't know. Flash fiction is fine. You can find problems in it if you want to, but really, are you feeling good about yourself that you found problems in it? It's just fast fiction by a guy who just likes horror. So he made short, cheap stories that people are buying for really cheap and reading, and they're liking it. I've actually read some of the comments. Some people are just like, no, this is good. It's fine. I read it on my lunch break while I was at work and stuff. I'm like, oh, someone actually like was at work and enjoyed their lunch break. So who's going to criticize it? So instead of criticizing, like I do, authors that write whole books that you have to like buy for a lot of money and read, and they got problems, I'm actually a big fan of this guy who just wants to make spooky stories that anyone can read and afford, and it makes him happy. So, I don't know. Get off your high horse. It's fine. The stories are fine. You feel icky when he tells each kid to shoot him in the head. Gives you the same feeling as watching a horror movie. It's fine. Well, with that, damn it. Why don't you go home? Get out of my house, and I will see you next week. Well, it appears you found me in the part of the podcast I hate the most, where I tell you all about the places on the internet where you can find me. You can tell I hate this because of the sound effects making it sound like a stormy night in the drawing room of the damned. Now, there's that. Are you cool? I like cool people. It's the reason why I got involved in this business to begin with, just to meet cool people, not losers. So if you're cool, feel free to go over to my website, nuzzlehouse.com. But if you go there, you get to hear some of the other stuff that I and my wife work on, like the Radio Mystery Theater show, where we try to recreate the same show that used to be on in the 70s, but they don't make any episodes anymore. So we make our own, and we just steal all their commercials. And also, just in the curious mind, we made a Christmas album. If you go to our link tree, you can see that we made a Christmas album. It's the first thing we did after getting married, which I think everyone should do when they get married, is start talking about the Christmas album they're going to make. And we're working on a new show where we give relationship advice by reading paranormal smut. And since I think you might be cool, you can always just email me directly, glenn.nuzzles@gmail.com. But don't email if you're a nerdlinger or a dork. Now, back to business. I can't believe I drank all of them already. There's got to be one left.